But I think Bitcoin probably corrects into the mid 70s and probably ends the year in the mid 180s. And you say, well, how the hell is that going to happen? Because that's just what Bitcoin does. It'll clean out all the renters. And there are people out there right now at BlackRock and Fidelity that are talking to their clients about strategically owning Bitcoin. You mentioned the UAE, they own several hundred million Bitcoin. You mentioned the state of Wisconsin, several hundred million Bitcoin now. Incrementally, people are buying Bitcoin. As they incrementally buy the Bitcoin, it'll be very, very positive for Bitcoin's price activity.
Welcome back to The Culture Bit. I'm your host, Allen Helm. On today's episode, we chat with Anthony Scaramucci. He's a Long Island hustler, Goldman Sachs alum, and founder of SkyBridge Capital, and formerly President Trump's White House comms director. It was a great conversation, and we'll jump right into it. If you liked what you heard today, you can catch him at Bitcoin 2025 later this May. If you haven't secured your tickets yet, you can use code BM10 for 10% off at checkout. Link in the description below. Now let's dive into it. Anthony, pleasure to have you back on the show. Last time we chatted was leading into Bitcoin Mina. I know you spoke there. You had a nice fireside chat in the deep. And I know you have a lot of personal relationships. You mentioned to me specifically MBZ, among some others, and that you have, ties to the region. You want to see that region do well. And that region doing well ultimately translates to the US and everybody else doing well, which I thought was super interesting. I think at that time, price was at like 92,000. And, we've seen a pretty quick decline this week. Some indicators pointing potentially to tariffs going into place. And so I want to touch on all those things, SBR, new policy regulations. But before we get into that, one of the things I like to do here on the Culture Bit, right, is trying to educate new Bitcoiners. And sometimes they may not be super familiar with the guests that come on. So I want to start with a background on who is Anthony? What was your upbringing? How'd you get into finance? How'd you start SkyBridge Capital? How did that bring you to Bitcoin and all those things? So let's just start there. You're a Long Islander, Italian-American, no silver spoon. How did that grind shape and take on your money and power, and eventually Bitcoin?
Okay, so, first of all, it's always great to be on with you, Alan. But let's start with Bitcoin for 1 second, if you don't mind, because It was 91, it's now 88, and Bitcoin's had a 20% correction from its high, 108. But I just want you to imagine 3 short years ago, I was under the desk, okay, in like a bomb shelter position. That position that they told you to in elementary school when Bitcoin was at 15,000. So I just love Bitcoiners because they want everything so quickly. There are 2 types of Bitcoiners: those that check the prices every 15 seconds, and those that lie and say that they don't check the prices every 15 seconds, because of course they're checking it. So everybody just have to calm down on Bitcoin. But my background is pretty straightforward. I grew up here on Long Island. I'm talking to you from my home, which is about 2 miles from my parents' house. My dad grew up in northeastern Pennsylvania, a coal mining town, came here to mine sand, became a crane operator. My mother grew up in the town of Port Washington. I live in Manhasset, but she's still in Port Washington. My dad passed in 2023 at the age of 88, but my mom is still here, and I'm 2 miles down the road from her to take care of her. I'm an Italian mama's boy. I grew up in a large family. It was just my brother and sister in the house, but we probably had 18 cousins in the neighborhood. Okay, so we were in a Southern Italian enclave, Southern Italian family, traditional Italians. We played bocce. My uncle worked an accordion. My grandfather understood how to step on grapes and dry prosciutto. We had hanging ham legs in our basement growing up as a kid. So just set the scene for you. Like I'm like old school Italian from that generation, right? I'm born in 1964. I'm 61 years old. These people came back from the war. They made their families. They built their families. And they were all immigrants. And they loved, this is a undying, unconditional love affair with the United States. 2 of my uncles fought in the Second World War. My dad was drafted in the 50s, was about to be deployed to Korea, and then Dwight Eisenhower declared the armistice there. So thank God he didn't end up in Korea. He was in the Louisiana Bayou training for that. And that's my family. So we went to a public school. There was no money in the house. We weren't poor. I would never lie to anybody. I would never dishonor my dad's work ethic, Alan, by telling you or anybody grew up poor. Did not grow up poor. I grew up in the middle class. It was food and shelter and great Christmases. Did we beat the daylights out of each other in that house? Yes. Was it a tough house? Yeah. Are we blue collar people? Yes, we are blue collar people. So what do you think happens? There's some level of dysfunctionality. My older brother always says, let's put the word fun in the word dysfunctional, because we were dysfunctional people. Okay, we're still dysfunctional. So I had a high IQ, did well in public school, scored very well on things like the SAT and the LSAT. I ended up going to Tufts and Harvard. I had to pay my way. My dad was helpful, but we couldn't be super helpful. And so a seminal moment for me is in April of 1982. I was 18. My dad gave me a $10,000 check. He had cashed out his union life insurance. The cash value of his life insurance helped me go to school. That was a big moment for me because I was like, all right, man, I don't want to let him down. I'm a little bit of a Long Island jackass. I'm driving in my Camaro. I'm chasing these young Irish and Italian girls all over the neighborhood. And I'm not really paying close enough attention in school. I better knock it off. And so I did. I went to school, took it seriously, got into Harvard. My mother thought it was Hartford Law School. I mean, she had no clue. She's like, you're going to Connecticut for law school? I said, no, Mom, it's down the block from Tufts. All right. They were not educated. They didn't know any better. And my mother and father, I was blessed with something that your generation is likely not blessed with. And that is my mother and father had low expectations and they just wanted me to do well and they didn't care. And my dad was a crane operator. So if I went on to become a lawyer, God bless. I went to Hartford Law School and not Harvard Law School. God bless. Nobody cared. You guys have an enormous amount of pressure on you. You guys have to be, all of you have to be Mark Zuckerberg or Jeff Bezos by the time you're 28. And if you can't make them, then you have to be Elon Musk by the time you're 40. It's just too much pressure on people. You don't need that aggravation. And so I went to Goldman. Why did I go to Goldman? Well, I wanted to make money. And I had several hundred thousands of dollars of debt. And Goldman was paying a lot of money. And it was a really stupid decision. Again, if I'm just being brutally honest with you, because I got my ass fired from Goldman 18 months after I got there. I sucked at the job. And they were having layoffs during the Gulf War, and they fired me. And then I got lucky. I got rehired into Goldman about 2 months after I got fired. And then I worked in the asset management area where that fit my personality. And the first job didn't. Being an investment banker sucked for me. And so I was at Goldman for 7 years in total. Left in 1996 to start a company. Sold that company in 2001 to a company called Neuberger Berman. Neuberger was bought by Lehman. And then I went to go work at Lehman. I know Dick Fold very well. He's a very, very good friend of mine. Helped me get SkyBridge started. And the 7th of March, 2005, I started SkyBridge. So we're about to celebrate our 20th anniversary. And so if you're in New York in March, let me know. I'll send you an invite to my 20th anniversary party for SkyBridge. And I was always involved in politics. And so why? Well, I had no money and I was in the private banking area at Goldman. How do you meet rich people, Alan? You play golf, you play tennis, you hang out in clubs. Do I look like a fucking guy that would hang out in a club? No. Okay, I can't hit a tennis ball, can't swing a golf club. I think that shit's boring to me anyway. And so how do you meet rich people? You go to political fundraisers. So I wrote my first check to Rudy Giuliani when I was 29 in 1993. He won. And then I wrote a series of different checks. I supported Governor Pataki, Charlie Gargano, a whole group of people over the course of my career. And then obviously I was with Jeb Bush when Donald Trump got in the race in 2015. He beat Jeb Bush. I joined Trump. I went on to become Trump's failed White House communications director. He fired me after 11 days. That didn't really bother me. I guess it's supposed to, but it didn't. And I was loyal to Trump for about 2 years after that firing. And then I say, this guy's acting completely nuts and out of control. And so we ended up getting in a little bit of a fight with each other. Then he does what Trump does. He'll eventually do it to you guys, just a matter of time. He goes after everybody. He started going after my wife, this idiot, So, I mean, that's what he does. Starts attacking my wife. It doesn't, I mean, my wife probably hates him almost as much as Melania hates him. I mean, I probably should tell you that. I mean, she never said it publicly, but that's Trump. And so, that's it. How'd I get into Bitcoin? I got back from my failed stint in Washington and had learned about Bitcoin. Actually, there was a white paper in Washington that was produced by the Fed talking about the digitization of the dollar. And I was like, okay, wow, I got to get up to speed on that. What the hell are they talking about? And it brought me to Bitcoin. I made my first Bitcoin investment in October of 2020, 2 months after Michael Saylor. And I've been a Bitcoin investor for 4.5 years. It'll be 5 years in October. And I am the classic hodler. I bought it. I've never sold it. I bought more of it. I bought some at 69,000. I do love that number, by the way, 69. And we're gonna have a fucking great 69th birthday party, by the way. That'll be another thing. If you're nice, Alan, I'll invite you to my 69th birthday, which is only 8 years away. But I bought more Bitcoin at 69,000 in November of 2021. So if you want to call me a dummy for doing that, you can. I bought more at 17,000, 18,000 in 2022. I was under the gun. I mean, I got my ass kicked. My fund lost 39% of its dough in 2022. We were written up by everybody. We're told we were going to die, but we didn't. And it's 2 great years. 23 and 24 were great years for us. I mean, we probably doubled the size of the business in those 2 years. And so Bitcoin is now from 108,000 to 90,000, 88,000. Get a life. Okay, Bitcoin's going to be just fine. Get a life. And if you're upset about that and you don't have the confidence to buy more of it, don't be in this thing because, you're watching renters. They come in, they own it for a little while, they lose some money. Let me get the hell out. I don't know what I'm doing. And then they lose a little bit more money, and then that touches off a cascade of people that are in at higher levels, and they got to get out. And so maybe it settles down at 85,000, 80,000. I don't know where it's going today, but I'll tell you right now, if you get out of Bitcoin, because of the way the psychology works, it's very hard to get back into Bitcoin. So don't get out of Bitcoin. Don't even look at it. Don't look at it. And if you are looking at it, don't care, because everyone looks at it, obviously, as I said in the earlier part of this rendition.
It's hard not to. It's funny. Yeah, I think I fall
you're
somewhere.
Looking at it every 15 seconds, but don't care about it.
Yeah, no, I think I fall somewhere in between the two camps where I go through periods where I'm looking at it every 15 seconds. And ultimately, I don't want to disclose how long I've been hodling, but long enough where, a drawdown from 108,000 to 80, it's not fun to see. It's not the worst thing in the world either. But I know there's a lot of net new Bitcoiners into the space, some that, literally got it. I know you were laughing at how, you bought near the top 69,000 in 2021. And there's a lot of new Bitcoiners this cycle, who, here in 2025, may have bought the top at 108. But we, for those of us that have been around for a long enough time, time preference is everything. I appreciate you giving us a very robust background on who you are. Some of the main takeaways that I think I can gather from that. Love to hear that, you come from a background of, blue collar workers, tight knit family, school of hard knocks, so to say. I can imagine as being the middle child myself, going back and forth between, getting beat up by the older brothers, picking on the little brothers, and then ultimately at the end of the day, coming to the dinner table and having a good laugh. I mean, that really builds a lot of character. So love to hear those stories. The other big takeaway that I had here, right, is that, and I think this is probably a byproduct of being close to big families, having big families, supportive families, even if they aren't the most dysfunctional. Like you said, y'all like to put the fun in dysfunctional, right? I think that breeds inherently a robust system of trust, right? maybe a decentralized system. The bigger your family is, you can count on some people for certain things, count on others for other things. But they certainly taught you the value of lowering your time preference, investing in yourself, going to Harvard, your father, pulling from his savings to help you get through school. And everything is ultra important, right? And on top of that, right, the movement into Goldman Sachs, getting fired, then leveraging that to start your own company, not quit, sell that, have successes there, understand the value of being close to people of influence and people of power to, not only benefit yourself and your family, but move things in a positive direction are all super important skills in life. And obviously that all closely relates to the ethos of Bitcoin, the proof of work mentality and all that. So I think it makes a lot of sense as to why that asset as itself resonates with you so much. I think what I find very interesting, specifically, with a lot of people that got into Bitcoin in 2021, like yourself, Anthony, is that it came at a very interesting time. There, I think, are two big periods in Bitcoin's history so far that have been particularly interesting. Number one, 2008, the inception of Bitcoin, great financial crisis, a lot of cypherpunks who saw what was going on Wall Street, saw what was happening with the de-dollarization of the global market, and that coming down to play, and that spurred literally this creation of digital hard money. And then the second being really COVID, right? 2020, massive increase in the M2 money supply. Internet is booming, way larger than it was in 2008, right? We have platforms, formerly at the time Twitter, now X, having all these circles of financial experts talk, and also retail, right, starting to jump in and give in their way in discussion. And so we had this period where everybody was at home. People saw money supply increasing massively. For some people, it was a fun time. Others took advantage of it to try and educate themselves and prepare themselves for what was to come. We saw a total shift from in-office work culture to at-home work culture, dramatically changed the landscape of how people kind of see their day-to-day. And so, yeah, I say all that, to lean into the fact that you obviously came in on the one side where you saw, hey, dollars decreasing, dollars losing in value, assets are increasing because of inflation. Bitcoin seems the only, or at least one of the best flights to wealth stability and wealth security. So I want to get into that, right? Let's look at 2020. You're at SkyBridge. Why did Bitcoin make sense to you in that time? And how does that compare to where we are at now in 2025?
So there's a lot there. So here, the first thing I would say is if you look at Bitcoin and you take a cursory look, and I've got a lot of books here on Bitcoin, you don't understand it. You probably think it's financial blather. You probably think it's a code on the internet that how could that be worth anything? It's not backed by anything. And if you read, there's a woman at Goldman Sachs that writes about it all the time. She's a Bitcoin denier. She hates Bitcoin and she says it's worth absolutely nothing and it's backed by absolutely nothing. And so therefore, it'll go to zero. It'll eventually trade to zero. And then there's guys like Cliff Asness. He wrote a parable. He said Bitcoin got to 250 and then exploded. And there's still some people that like it. It's trading at 10,000 and this is the year 2030. Why am I bringing that up? Because there's a healthy skepticism about Bitcoin in the marketplace, and people that don't really study Bitcoin, they have that feeling about Bitcoin. Now, maybe they're going to be right. I don't know. We'll have to see 10 years from now, 5 years from now. I'm been humbled by life, Allen, and I've been humbled by markets. So I'm not going to talk to you definitively about this. I'm just going to give my analysis and tell you that I've put my money where my mouth is. And so what I would say is that doesn't really understand the nature of that asset. And so what that asset is a secure, decentralized, fully distributed, very transparent spreadsheet. It's a very transparent system to move value between people. And by the way, people have to know this, their bank is a spreadsheet. Okay, your money's on the spreadsheet in one account, my money's on the spreadsheet in the other account. If you're the car dealer, the money in my account goes down, the money in your account goes up. What are those things? They're just digits in the bank. We've decided that we're going to trust this instrument, this US dollar. It's a form of technology to transfer value between each other. And why do we do it? We have all these different reasons why we do it. Okay, but what if you could create a trustless system? What if you could create a system where you don't have to rely on the government, but there's a network, and so a result of which there's hundreds of thousands of people, so you don't have to trust any one person, and the system is truly transferable, unhackable, it is completely secure, and then it ticks off all the elements that we've used to have money in our society: immutability, scarcity, trust in the technology. And when you look at it from that perspective, okay, it has value. The network itself has value. And if you look at it from that perspective, is it any different from gold? Gold is a bar of gold. Yeah, it's metallic. Some people will argue it has some manufacturing value. It has value for jewelry. Is that 5 or 10% of the value of gold? No, gold is valuable because we all perceive it to be valuable. We trust that other people will perceive this to be valuable, and so that we'll be able to use this to have value between each other. Does that make sense?
Yeah, makes total sense.
And so when you do the homework, Stan Druckenmiller, Ray Dalio, Paul Tudor Jones, Michael Novogratz, Pete Grieger, Michael Saylor, you pick the person. Neil Ferguson, who wrote the legendary book, The Ascent of Money, is a historian about money and about what we use money for in our society. If you do the homework and you look at it, all of a sudden you're like, okay, that is money. Okay. And then will it be adopted by the society? As Satoshi said, will it catch on? You may want to buy some, it may catch on. And then you have this younger generation of people that understand the digital world, and then it starts to catch on. And now you're looking at adoption rates. And, so where are we? If it's Web 1, we're like in the year 2000. Imagine the growth between 2000 and 2025. And then let's be Michael Saylor be mad at me. Let's be the Bitcoin is gold theorist. Michael says it's digital property. Michael says it's an operating system. It's a new software for money and the cycles of money and the transactions of money. It's a cheaper, easier, and it's immutable. The government can't corrupt it by adding to it. And so therefore it becomes even more valuable. But let's just say that it's gold. Okay, let's say that it's a form of digital gold. And by the way, it's easier to store and it's easier to move around than gold, is it not?
Absolutely. I mean,
okay,
you don't need
and so now all of a sudden it may be better than gold, but let's say it's just gold. Okay, and so as it's adapting, it's going to go through volatility curves. Amazon did that. Microsoft did that. Apple Computer did that. Pick the companies. And so this is now being adopted and married up against the people like me and Saylor and the guys that like it. There is a chant out there of people that don't like it. It could be Warren Buffett. It could be the woman that runs Goldman Sachs' asset management investment research. It could be a whole host of people, and they're going to chant against it. And so that creates this uncertainty. And it creates the cycle. And if you look at it from that point of view, there's an adoption curve, and that adoption curve should come with high volatility. But if we're right, the volatility will be volatility upward. It won't be volatility. It won't trade to zero, But we'll see.
Yeah, no, we'll definitely we'll see. Well, I think one of the interesting things about this cycle more than anything, right, is Bitcoin's had a pretty, even though to those outside looking in would describe Bitcoin as volatile, it's had a pretty steady parabolic growth curve, right? We do know that in the 4-year cycles that Bitcoin tends to double or even triple in value, and we're about 15 years into this digital money experiment, so to say. Obviously, it doesn't have as long standing of a history as gold, but to all your points, right? It's scarce, it's infinitely divisible, it's immutable, it's decentralized. There's no single entity that can control it. Anybody can access the network. Money transfers are almost instantaneous, and require very little capital to do so. So it's not only is it of a benefit to the unbanked, and people who necessitate cross-border payments, but it's also extremely beneficial to banks who are moving large sum quantities of wealth. I think I read an article the other day where JP Morgan was literally trying to take advantage of the $20 gold arbitrage trade from London to New York. And I'm just sitting here thinking the price of flying a plane over, using the jet fuel, the personnel to load the plane up and move it all, where you could just have all that wealth in Bitcoin. Makes a lot of sense. And I think that's starting to catch up, right? What has traditionally been with Bitcoin a grassroots movement, a grassroots adoption curve, right? To use that comparison to the money growth curve, I think has completely gone out the door this instance, right? I remember, heck, not even 2-3 years ago, that both Larry Fink and I think Jamie Dimon still leans this way potentially, although he's opened up a little bit more. We're both very anti-Bitcoin, and in the last 2 years, right, we've had reversal on gap accounting, we've had the reversal of SAB 121. Those brought online the Bitcoin ETFs. We've also seen, the failure of Choke Point 2.0 from the previous administration, the strides that Senator Elizabeth Warren was trying to take to stomp out our industry with the debanking of Bitcoin and crypto-focused hedge funds. And the new administration, the Trump administration,
How did that work
here.
out for Senator Elizabeth Warren? Did that work out well for her?
It did not work out well for her. I mean, she's still in office. She's still
Yeah.
in office. And I'd actually be curious to hear what your take is on that.
Well, I mean, I have a take that gets everybody upset. So let me just tell you my take. She was tight with Sam's parents. She was tight with Barbara Freed, and she was tight with Joe Bankman. And they were all law school professors. They knew each other a long time. And Sam is a brilliant young man. He's very flawed, obviously. And they met with her regularly, and they met with Gensler regularly. And then the kid obviously committed fraud, got himself in trouble. And Elizabeth Warren, in order to shield herself, went indiscriminately and wantonly hard at the Bitcoiners and hard at the cryptocurrency and the blockchain. And she was a very powerful person during the Biden administration. She had staff at Treasury, she had staff at the SEC, she had staff at the White House, and she had staff in the Federal Reserve. And so she went very hard. I mean, Biden signing SAB 121, he doesn't even know what it is, but her staff was there, and she's directing the staff from a financial services perspective. And she crushed the industry because she was trying to shield herself politically from the fallout of being that close to Sam. And she was starting this anti-crypto army, which, of course, who the hell wants that? Nobody. Okay. And moreover, there's no votes for that, Alan. And so, she single-handedly with Gensler took out the Democrats in the Senate and in the House. I mean, look, Trump was a beast, and he was running against Kamala Harris, and Trump won the election. There are many factors, but there was water that got added to Trump's bucket that tipped the election. Some of it was the inflation. Some of it was Joe Biden's age and his mental decline. Some of it was the abrupt transition into Kamala Harris. Some of it was the Bitcoiners. Some of it was Silicon Valley. It had enough of the bureaucracy and the regulation. They put up the white flag and they started migrating over to Trump. I'm not just saying it was just the Bitcoiners, but the Bitcoiners did put $250 million into the 24 campaign, 40 million of which went into the race in Ohio. and knocked Sherrod Brown on his ass, knocked him right out of the Senate. 18-year veteran of the Senate, bye-bye. Okay, you hate Bitcoin, we're going to get you out of the Senate. So we have a pro-Bitcoin House and Senate. McCormick won that race in Pennsylvania. He's a good, close personal friend of mine. I'm a donor of his, and David's a great guy. And he was able to knock out a veteran, Casey, another guy that was in the Senate a long period of time, knocked him on his ass. And so yes, the votes matter and the politics matter. And Trump has put in some very good people. Whatever my issues are with Donald Trump, he has put in some very good people to help run the process. And I think Sachs, by the way, has done a very smart thing. I don't know if David Bailey would agree with me on this. I mean, I do love David Bailey. But I think what Sachs has said in that executive order that Trump signed was, we're going to evaluate this over 6 months. And I think Sachs has told people quietly he would like to get some buy-in from the Democrats on a strategic Bitcoin reserve, because he doesn't want it to be, it's in when Trump is in office. If a Democrat gets in office, it's out, it's in, it's out. He wants it to be like gold. Bipartisan commitment to gold. I just want to remind everybody, there are 27 different strategic reserves. There are rare earth minerals, there's lithium, there's petroleum. We have a strategic petroleum reserve. And so there's a lot of different types of reserves. And you don't hear Democrats get to the podium and say, I hate the lithium reserve. We got to sell the lithium reserve the minute that Trump leaves office. So I think that this is still a very political hot potato. And I think that Sachs is doing a very good job of like, okay, we got it. Let's see if we can join forces, get a bipartisan commitment to this.
Absolutely. Well, I think one of the most interesting things of just the last 6 months is we had a mandate from the American people, essentially, sweeping, both the executive, the House, and the Senate, the straight Republican flush of representatives, in the hope, and I'm speaking collectively on behalf of the entire U.S. population here, but just from reading the news, right, the assumption was that the previous administration failed economically. Inflation was at all-time highs. We are losing dollar dominance in the global markets, right? We have the rise of the BRICS Pact, Brazil, Russia, India, South Africa, who are looking to formulate a separate basket of goods outside of the dollar and looking to hard assets like gold, and even potentially Bitcoin for some. I know last time you and I spoke, there was talks of Howard Lutnick becoming the Treasury Secretary. And to your point, there are loads of people in Trump's current cabinet that either hold Bitcoin currently or have outwardly spoken very pro-Bitcoin. I mean, we know Trump has it. We know Vice President J.D. Vance has it on hand. We know Vivek Ramaswamy holds Bitcoin. We know Tulsi Gabbard holds Bitcoin. We know RFK holds Bitcoin. So there's very pro sentiment right now in comparison to Elizabeth Warren and her, anti-crypto army. And that has probably been one of the largest catalysts for some of the upward Bitcoin movement outside of everything the institutions have been doing, from BlackRock, from MicroStrategy, the Bitcoin ETFs. I mean, heck, MicroStrategy sitting on, MicroStrategy and BlackRock combined are sitting on almost 1 million Bitcoin together. I think MicroStrategy has somewhere of 478,000, which is just crazy to think. And then the U.S. Marshal Service, I think, is sitting on another 270,000. And I say all this, right, because again, going back to what collectively, the United States voted for, right? It was economic reform, reversion back to sound money, hard money principles. But I think one of the false expectations that was set up was that the money printing was going to be slowed by things like Elon Musk's Doge, by things like tariffs, cutting government spending. And the reality is that the U.S. has too high of a yearly deficit that doesn't matter what Doge cuts, doesn't matter how much the tariffs do, doesn't matter how much we bring back manufacturing, inflation is still going to continue, which is only going to further the need for Bitcoin. And on top of that, not only do all these not only do we have all of this attention here in the U.S. at the government and institutional level, but we have sovereign wealth funds, such as the UAE buying IBIT, right? We have Russia who is mining Bitcoin. We have China who has reversed, their anti-Bitcoin mining policies and their anti-Bitcoin stances. And so, I guess my question to you, Anthony, here is you're very attuned to the financial markets. I know you have ties into Washington directly. I believe you mentioned that Howard Lutnick is a friend and acquaintance of yours. How are these conversations really shaping up? Like, what are the big concerns here? Why is there an attention on Bitcoin, and what is this going to do for the U.S. economy?
Well, again, I think that it's incremental. I think that people in our community get frustrated that overnight every single thing that Joe Biden and Elizabeth Warren perpetrated on the community hasn't been unwound immediately. But it's happening. Coinbase made an announcement that their lawsuit is over. The FCC is withdrawing the case. Brian had to point out on CNBC that $50 million had to get spent. Just think of the unfortunate nature of this, where thank God that company has the money to fight the SEC, but there are other companies that had to settle with the SEC. I mean, Jesse Powell from Kraken settled with the SEC, paid him $30 million, and they went after him again. So hopefully that gets dropped as well. But I think if you look at the magnitude of what's going on, you've got Atkins coming in as the chair, Lutnick is a coiner, Bessent is a coiner. As you mentioned, the Trump family are coiners. And so you have regulation and you have proposals related to regulation that are very Bitcoin friendly. You also have a stable coin, and I really believe this. I think the stable coin legislation and the definition around it will help Bitcoin because, Tether has helped Bitcoin. You and I both know that. And Circle has helped Bitcoin. And once we have more clarity on that, once we have more clarity on the legislation, I predict that will happen in this term, likely in the next 14 months. Once that happens, we'll be off to the races. But it's not happening immediately. It's not happening eminently because that's the nature of Washington. You have to get buy-in. You have to go through committees, I'm laughing because, Musk is in there. He's got the chainsaw out. He's trying to cut everything. He hasn't really cut that much, and I'm laughing. Yeah, some people have taken his retirement package. Most people have not, and what's happened every time we've tried to do this to the government, yeah, some stuff gets cut. Some things are successful, but the government survives. The government has I wish I had the government's immune system, Alan, okay, to handle all the attacks on the government in terms of how it survives and it's resilient and this guy's getting fired, that guy's getting fired, this is getting cut, nothing happens, it just nothing happens. So
it's a beast of a machine.
And so you can't expect Trump to come in overnight change everything. But if you said to me in October, hey, Trump's going to come in and these SEC lawsuits are going away. There's going to be clarity in terms of legislation. They're going to work on a bipartisan strategy to get a Bitcoin strategic reserve on the balance sheet of the United States. And there's a group of people working in Washington. Saab 121 has been reinstalled. And there's a group of people working in Washington with the nation's banks to see if we can get custody on the money center banks. I'd be like, wow, this is unbelievable progress. I mean, imagine all that. So those things are all positive. It's just not happening as quickly as people would like it to happen.
Well, and it needs to trickle down too. I mean, would love to get your take on just Trump's proposed tariff policies. I think the intended goal there, as I understand, and I'm not, economically literate enough on understanding the mechanisms of whether or not tariffs are a good or bad thing. But as I've read online, right, the intention behind implementing these tariffs is to bring back U.S. manufacturing and capture some of the lost revenue as a result, right? So if you have a manufacturing plant in China and those dollars go out of the country into China, it's very unlikely that those dollars come back, which doesn't do much to stimulate economic growth. On the flip side, the argument that I've really heard against tariffs, right, is by implementing these in the short term, that is going to cause a significant rise in the cost of goods, right, which ultimately not only impacts, the lower 50% of Americans, but ultimately it affects everybody, right? Price of eggs go up. Your iPhone starts to cost more, right? Your vehicles, right? Almost no vehicles entirely manufactured here in the US nowadays. And so you double that up on everyday expenses, right? All of a sudden, you have more and more Americans who are living paycheck to paycheck, which is ultimately not good in that instance, right? You're not able to send your kids to college. You're not able to plan an emergency fund and those sorts of things. So what are your take on these tariff implementations, and how does that compare to maybe previous economic policies of the Biden administration?
So, I'm not a big fan of the tariffs for all the reasons that you're suggesting. It's just basically a tax increase, and it's a regressive tax because the rich people could afford it, and the poor people, it's going to eat into their disposable income. And there's better ways to do what you're trying to achieve. What are you trying to achieve? You want more manufacturing in the U.S. and you want a fair trade system. But what you don't want to do is you don't want to break the system. Listen, people don't, the Trump people don't like hearing this, but let me give you the examples. Let's say you have a blue collar family and you have one person in the family that's done very well. And the other people are struggling in the family, but this one person's done very well. And so what does the one person do? They pay for tuitions. They buy a few cars. They take care of medical expenses. Somebody gets hurt on a blue-collar job. They rush in and make sure that the rent's paid until the person heals. Get that one group, okay? And then you have another family. You got a blue-collar family, very rich person. He doesn't give a shit about any of those family members, and he's got a beautiful swimming pool, and he wants to charge his family members admission to his swimming pool. Which family do you think is going to do better, Alan, holistically? Which family is going to do better?
Okay. Not the one charging admission to their
pool. So what Trump is doing, I think, is very misguided because you have 4% of the world's population, you have 26% of the world's output, and I think our people in the post-World War era, our policymakers understood that we had to imbalance the trade a little bit to help the rest of the world rise in living standards. And we believe that would lead to better markets for U.S. goods and services. It would lead to more prosperity. And I can give you evidence of this. We are 4% of the world's population, 26% of the world's output, the same number that we were 40 years ago. So the world has grown economically, and the United States has maintained its mantle of leadership. And so this is evidence that this stuff has worked. And so the tariffs that I like are the ones that are surgical. So if you said to me, okay, Alan, the Chinese have teamed up with their private companies and they're subsidizing them, and now they have predatory pricing in our markets, and they're going to dump steel into our markets, or they're going to make things at the same price as us, like this Deep Seek or whatever the hell it is. You really think it would cost $6 million? That's a bunch of BS. You know that, and I know that. Okay, so, but they've got the government subsidizing them, and so now the prices are going to drop, and it's going to make them more competitive, and it may knock out some of our industries or hurt some of our companies. I am for surgical tariffs to get their prices back to parity with where the free market would have those prices. Trump doesn't want that. Trump wants to end the asymmetry in the trading system, despite being the richest family member in the system. He wants there to be reciprocal tariffs now with everybody. And anybody that is a long-term economist would tell you, yeah, I get it. That's your argument. We've been taken advantage of, and America first, and rah, rah, rah. But America first will make America last in public opinion. America first will change the way people think about us around the world, and it will reset the way our allies seek out alternatives to America. And that will be a painful process for somebody like me to watch that actually understands the dynamic and the history of the post-World War II order. And while it hasn't been perfect, it has been very, very successful for the United States.
I appreciate the nuanced answer there. I know we're coming up here on time, Anthony, and I also know you're speaking at Bitcoin 2025 later this May. So maybe to take the tariffs questions a step further in everything you just laid out, right? The importance of surgical tariffs versus, I'm going to use an improper definition here, but essentially revenge tariffs, right? To make America great again in the short term. Where do you see Bitcoin going come May? Where do you see Bitcoin going overall in 2025, both on the global stage for the U.S. and for the everyday, American who's just trying to save a portion of their paycheck? What is your recommendation for people? And where do you see things going?
I think Bitcoin was at 68, 69,000 when Trump got into office. It shot up to 108,000. That was probably an overshoot. If you told me Bitcoin was at 69,000 and it was 78,000 4 months into Trump's term with all these pro-Bitcoiners in Washington, I said, well, that's a really nice, handsome move. But the fact it went to 108 on its way to 78, no bueno. And I think people have to get psychologically comfortable that could Bitcoin correct into the mid-70s from where we are right now? I believe that. Yeah, it's possible. Could it go lower than that? I think if it goes lower than that, it's a huge buying opportunity. And I think I would try to figure out ways to buy more. Although I'm loaded to the gills with Bitcoin, I would try to figure out a way to buy more. But I think Bitcoin probably corrects into the mid-70s and probably ends the year in the mid-180s. And you say, well, how the hell is that going to happen? Because that's just what Bitcoin does. It'll clean out all the renters. And there are people out there right now at BlackRock and Fidelity that are talking to their clients about strategically owning Bitcoin. You mentioned the UAE. They own several hundred million of Bitcoin. You mentioned the state of Wisconsin, several hundred million Bitcoin now. Incrementally, people are buying Bitcoin. As they incrementally buy the Bitcoin, it'll be very, very positive for Bitcoin's price activity. And that's not to say that there won't be price movements like this. There's things going on that we've just experienced. The biggest hack, $1.5 billion was hacked at a Bybit by the North Koreans. Terrible hack. They're going to survive it, thank God. And they've got a lot of friends in the industry that have helped them and backed them up. But that causes a crisis of confidence when things like that happen. And so go back to prior hacks, look at Bitcoin price activity, and you'll see that what I'm saying is more or less true. So I think we bottom in the mid-70s, but we close the year in the mid-180s.
Love the price prediction there. It actually aligns with, I had the chance to speak with James Lavish and Mark Moss. And James said 180. Mark said in the short term 180. He also says in the long term 200 million, which I love his bullish sentiment on things. But yeah, I think that's a very realistic price number. I think people should expect continued drawdowns as new policies come into place, and everybody tries to navigate the madness that is just Bitcoin and crypto, and really, honestly, just the global economic market. I mean, we're living in such a crazy transformative time. And this is where winners and losers really cut their teeth, right? People take risks. They take calculated risks. They'll win. Some people get a little bit reckless. They might win, they might lose, and then others just stand on the wayside. And so I would caution to anybody listening not to be standing on the wayside. Do some research, understand what your appetite of risk is. I think you and I, Anthony, both agree that having no exposure to Bitcoin is probably the worst thing you can do. At least have one,
get off
5,
zero.
10.
Get off zero.
And
you don't have to own a whole Bitcoin. Put a little bit of money in, buy IBIT if you have to. You have to buy a whole Bitcoin.
Absolutely. Okay, so last question for you here. You're speaking at Bitcoin 2025. At Bitcoin 2024, really was a monumental year. You mentioned this earlier that a bunch of big name Bitcoiners influenced the presidential election. I think I would also argue that it was the catalyst for big tech to pivot its previous position of being pro DNC to over to the RNC. And yeah, would love to hear what your take is on what you think. What are you going to be speaking on at Bitcoin 2025, and what do you think are going to be some main topics of discussion now that Trump is in office? There's tons of attention on the SBR and even potentially integration of Bitcoin into our own sovereign wealth fund.
Well, I mean, you and I know that we live like dogs, right? Every year is 7 years, so 2 months from now is like, I mean, it's like a year, right? I don't. The whole world could be changing, but I think the likelihood of what I'll be speaking about is the stablecoin legislation and why that's so good for Bitcoin and why that will feed the Bitcoin ecosystem. I think we'll have more definition about what that's going to be, and I can help people think about it from an analytical perspective. I think that if we're going towards a strategic Bitcoin reserve by that time, and I'm not saying we will because it's not enough time, but let's say that we are, I think we can talk about the implications of that. And I also think that that would be a big setup for, it'd be a race. There'd be an arms race. There'd be a Bitcoin arms race. You're not going to let the United States own the Bitcoin network. You're not going to let Michael Saylor and the United States own the Bitcoin network. You're going to be in there and you're going to buy a piece of that network and want to be a part of it. And so we'll have to see what happens, but you could be in a situation, let's talk positively for a moment. You could be in a situation where, God willing, we'll have a war ended. God willing, we'll have some resolution of what's going on in Gaza. And all of a sudden you're in a situation where risk premiums come down in the market because there's less global macroeconomic uncertainty. I think that would also be very good for Bitcoin. But Bitcoin's a cycle. Bitcoin goes through a cycle. Anybody that's buying Bitcoin that thinks it's just an asymmetric bet short term is wrong. I think if they step back, they can realize that it is an asymmetric bet longer term, because I do think it gets adopted and trades to the valuation at or near, possibly better than gold. But it's not going to happen overnight. But we'll see. By May, I'm sure there'll be a lot of different cool and very interesting things to talk about. And I really appreciate you guys including me.
Yeah, always, Anthony. It's always a pleasure chatting with you. Looking forward to hearing your talk on stablecoins. I think that's really the up and coming narrative right now is, Tether on Lightning, stables on Bitcoin, the evolution of the dollar into its digital form and how it's complementary to Bitcoin. Albeit, I know there's some Bitcoiners that are going to be like, the dollarization of the dollarization of Bitcoin is not a good thing, but I think that's yet to be determined. I'm excited for monuments. I think everything is good for Bitcoin ultimately. Anthony, real quickly for everybody who was listening today, where can people follow you? You always give great insights, not just into the economy, but into Bitcoin as a whole. Where can people find you?
We got a couple of things. I have my open book podcast, which I interview authors. Could be all different types of authors. I'm a little bit of a bookworm. I have a podcast with Katty Kay called The Rest is Politics US, which analyzes the political situation with some macroeconomic observations. And then if you want to find me on Instagram or Twitter, I'm at Scaramucci, which pisses off all my children that I block them by getting at Scaramucci before they could.
Awesome. Anthony, it's been a pleasure. Looking forward to chatting with you next time after Bitcoin 2025.
Great to be on with you, Alan. God bless.